Take me with you, Ajashi, the tiny girl whispered, her voice trembling but her Korean perfect. Amani Vance was huddled in the shadows of a cold supply closet, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Outside, the heavy thud of work boots belonged to a man who wanted to make her disappear forever. But it wasn't a monster who found her. It was a miracle in a silk dress. 6-year-old Haneul, the silent princess of Seoul's most dangerous empire, reached out a hand and spoke for the first time in 3 years. "My Appa is the king," the girl said, looking into Amani's tear-filled eyes. "If you stay with me, the monsters can't touch you." Amani laughed through her fear, ruffling the girl's hair. "And what does a king want with a girl like me?" she joked. But the laughter died when the door swung wide, revealing a man draped in shadows and power. Jun-Ho Kang, the Billionaire Mafia boss the world whispered about in fear, didn't call the police. He didn't call security. Instead, he dropped to one knee before the trembling orphan and uttered the words that would change her life. "You gave my daughter her voice. Now I will give you the world."
Before we continue, we welcome you to Afro-Korean love thrillers, the home of dark romance, forbidden passion, power, betrayal, and captivating revenge stories. Please do me a favor. Tap that comment section and tell us quickly where you are watching from. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any new thriller that drops here. Sit back and relax because this story is just getting started. Now let's get back to our story.
The heavy iron door of the supply closet didn't just open. It seemed to disintegrate under the sheer weight of the authority behind it. Jun-Ho Kang stepped into the cramped, dimly lit space, his presence instantly vacuuming the air out of the room. He was a man carved from granite and dressed in silk, a dragon in a bespoke suit. His eyes, cold and sharp as shards of obsidian, scanned the room until they landed on the scene that would have baffled any other man in Seoul. His daughter, Haneul, who had been a ghost in her own home for 3 years, was clutching the hand of a trembling, dusty girl who looked like she'd been living in the building's shadows. Amani's breath hitched. She knew who he was. Every tabloid and street whisper in Korea carried the name of the man of trillions, the boss of the Kang syndicate whose mercy was as rare as a lunar eclipse. She expected him to shout, to have his guards drag her away for daring to touch his heir. Instead, Jun-Ho stood frozen. The silence in the room was deafening until Haneul tugged on Amani's sleeve again, her voice small but clear. "Appa, she's the one. She stayed with me in the dark." The boss's gaze shifted to Amani. She tried to stand, her knees knocking together, her mind racing through every possible apology. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. She found me. I was just—" "Be silent," Jun-Ho commanded. The words weren't loud, but they carried the force of a landslide. He took 2 slow, measured steps toward her. The scent of expensive sandalwood and cold rain enveloped her. He looked at her tattered janitor's uniform, the smudge of grease on her cheek, and the undeniable fire of defiance buried deep in her brown eyes. He looked back at his daughter, whose face was finally lit with a spark of life, then back to Amani. "My daughter has not spoken a word since the day her mother was buried," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous vibration. "Doctors from across the globe failed her, priests and therapists failed her, and yet she speaks to a girl hiding in a closet." He reached out, his large, scarred hand hovering near Amani's face. She flinched, expecting a blow, but he merely tucked a stray curl behind her ear. It was a gesture of ownership, not kindness. "You have 2 choices, Amani Vance," he said, revealing he already knew her name despite her being a nobody. "You can step out of this closet and return to the gutter, where your supervisor and your past will eventually swallow you whole. Or you come with me. You will live in my house, you will breathe my air, and you will be my daughter's shadow. In exchange, I will make you untouchable. No one will ever hunt you again." He held out his hand, palm up. "But know this, if you enter my world, there is no leaving it. You belong to the Kang house now. Choose." Amani looked at his hand, then at Haneul's hopeful face. She knew she was dancing with a monster, but for the first time in her life, the monster was offering her a shield instead of a cage. She reached out and placed her hand in his. The dragon had spoken, and the girl from the shadows had finally been seen. The transition from the grime of the supply closet to the backseat of a Maybach was so jarring that Amani felt as though she had been transported to another planet. Beside her, Haneul had fallen into a peaceful sleep, her small head resting against Amani's shoulder, a stark contrast to the tension vibrating through the man in the front seat. Jun-Ho Kang didn't speak. He simply stared out at the neon-lit streets of Seoul, his silhouette as sharp as a blade. When the car finally pulled through the towering iron gates of a secluded estate, Amani's breath hitched. The mansion was a fortress of glass and steel, perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Han River. It was beautiful, but it was cold, a cathedral built for a god who didn't believe in mercy. As they stepped into the foyer, the marble floors polished to a mirror shine. A phalanx of servants stood in perfect, terrifying formation. Their eyes didn't linger on Amani's scuffed shoes or her worn skin. They looked straight ahead, as if she were a ghost. But the silence was broken by the sharp, rhythmic click of heels. A woman with hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her skin emerged from the shadows. This was Madame Park, the head housekeeper, whose eyes raked over Amani with a disdain so visceral it felt like a physical weight. "Upstairs," Jun-Ho commanded, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Prepare the East Wing guest suite. She is to be with Haneul at all times." Madame Park's lip curled. "The East Wing, sir, that is for family, surely the staff quarters." Jun-Ho didn't even turn around. "Did I stutter, Madame Park?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Without another word, the housekeeper bowed stiffly and gestured for Amani to follow. Amani was led to a room that was larger than her entire apartment. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a view of the city lights that felt more like a taunt than a gift. A silk robe laid on the bed, and a bath had already been drawn, the scent of expensive oils filling the air. For the first time in years, Amani was safe from the monsters outside, yet as she looked at her reflection in the massive vanity mirror, she felt a different kind of dread. She was a black orphan with no family and no status, tucked away in the heart of a dynasty that hated her existence. She was the woman who had given the silent princess her voice, but in this fortress of glass, Amani realized she was also the only one whose voice no one wanted to hear. As she lay in the softest bed she had ever touched, she clutched the sheets, her ears ringing with the silence of the mansion. She had been saved by a billionaire, but she was now a prisoner of his world. And in the darkness, she could feel the eyes of the Kang Empire watching, waiting for her to slip. The sun rose over the Han River, bleeding gold and crimson through the floor-to-ceiling glass, but the warmth didn't reach the interior of the Kang mansion. Amani woke to the sound of soft, rhythmic thumping. Following the noise, she found Haneul in the center of the expansive playroom, sitting amidst a sea of discarded crayons and expensive silk cushions. The child was staring at a blank sketchbook, her small hand trembling as she held a black charcoal pencil. Jun-Ho stood in the doorway, his silhouette imposing against the stark white walls. He didn't enter, he simply watched with an expression that bordered on physical pain. "She draws the same thing every day," he whispered as Amani approached. "A black circle, over and over. The doctors say it's the void left by her mother. They say she chose silence because the world became too loud to bear." Amani sat on the floor beside the girl, ignoring the cold marble. She didn't try to take the pencil. Instead, she began to hum a low, soulful melody, a song her own mother had sung in the small, cramped apartment back in the States before the world went dark. It was a song about the stars and how they only shine because the night is deep. Haneul's hand stopped. She turned her head, her dark eyes searching Amani's face. For the first time, Amani saw not a princess, but a mirror. She saw the same hollow ache of being an outsider, of being a soul trapped in a place that didn't understand its language. "The circle isn't a void, is it?" Amani asked softly in Korean, her accent thick but her heart clear. "It's a shield. You're keeping the world out so they can't hurt what's left inside." Haneul dropped the charcoal. Her small fingers reached out, tracing the patterns on Amani's skin, fascinated by the deep mahogany hue she had only seen in books. Then the miracle happened again. The girl leaned in and whispered into Amani's ear, a secret meant only for them. "You smell like the rain," Haneul said in her native tongue. "And you have the same eyes as the lady in my dreams, the one who told me a warrior was coming to wake me up." Behind them, Amani heard the sharp intake of Jun-Ho's breath. The billionaire mafia boss, a man who moved markets and ended lives with a nod, looked utterly defeated by the simplicity of the moment. He realized then that it wasn't a medical breakthrough Haneul needed. It was the recognition of a shared struggle. Amani wasn't just a tutor or a shadow. She was the only person in this fortress who knew what it felt like to be invisible. In that moment, the language of the heart bypassed years of trauma, binding the orphan and the heiress together in a way that terrified Amani. Because now, she had something to lose. The sanctuary of the playroom was shattered the following afternoon when Madame Park appeared, her face a mask of cold formality. "The chairman is in the Eastern Garden," she announced, her voice clipping every syllable. "The elders have arrived. They have requested to see the guest." Amani felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She smoothed the skirt of the modest, elegant dress Jun-Ho had ordered for her, a garment that cost more than she used to earn in a year, and took Haneul's hand. As they walked toward the traditional stone garden, the atmosphere shifted. The modern glass gave way to ancient wood and meticulously manicured bonsai trees, a place where history was preserved like a weapon. Standing beneath a pagoda were 3 elderly men, their faces etched with the severity of a century of tradition. These were the Council of Elders, the silent architects of the Kang Empire. Beside them stood Jun-Ho, looking less like a father and more like a monarch holding back a storm. So, the eldest, a man with eyes like clouded marbles, spoke without looking at Amani. "This is the miracle worker, a girl with no name, no lineage, and no place in our world." Amani felt the weight of their collective gaze, a mixture of clinical curiosity and deep-seated prejudice. She was a stain on their carefully curated canvas. One of the men stepped forward, his cane clicking sharply on the stone path. "We are told the princess speaks to you. We find it hard to believe that a child of the Kang bloodline would find solace in a stranger from the streets." "She isn't a stranger," Haneul said, her voice ringing out with a clarity that made the elders flinch. She stepped in front of Amani, her small chin tilted upward. "She is my Unnai, and she hears the things you are too loud to notice." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jun-Ho's hand tightened on the hilt of his cane, his eyes flashing with a dangerous pride, but the eldest elder merely narrowed his eyes. "A voice is a powerful gift, child, but it can be silenced just as easily as it was found." He finally turned his gaze to Amani, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Do not mistake my grandson's fascination for acceptance, girl. In this garden, we prune the branches that do not belong. You are an invasive species, and the council does not tolerate disorder." Amani didn't back down. She felt the heat of her own ancestors rising in her chest, the strength of 1,000 survivors. "I'm not here for your gardens or your gold," she said, her Korean steady and defiant. "I'm here for her, and if you want to prune me, you'll find that some roots go deeper than you can imagine." As they walked away, Amani felt the shadows of the garden stretching toward her. The ultimatum was clear. The council wouldn't just watch her, they were going to try to break her. And if they couldn't break her, they would destroy the only thing that kept her in this house. The transition from the garden to the inner sanctum of the Kang estate felt like moving from a trial by fire to a trial by ice. Jun-Ho did not speak of the council's threats as he led Amani into a room hidden behind a wall of mahogany bookshelves. It wasn't a library, but a command center, filled with glowing monitors and maps of Seoul's digital infrastructure. "The elders believe you are a weakness," Jun-Ho said, his voice cold and precise as he handed Amani a sleek, encrypted tablet. "In my world, the only way to protect a weakness is to turn it into a weapon. If you are to stay by Haneul's side, you cannot just be a companion. You must be her first line of defense." The tutor protocol was not about phonics or arithmetic. Over the next 2 weeks, Amani's days were split into grueling segments. In the mornings, she sat with Haneul, their bond deepening as they shared stories of Amani's life in America, the vibrant colors of the streets, and the music that refused to be silenced. But in the afternoons, Jun-Ho's most trusted security specialists took over. They taught Amani how to read a room for exits, how to identify the subtle bulge of a concealed weapon under a tailored blazer, and how to use her perceived invisibility as a tactical advantage. Jun-Ho oversaw it all personally. One evening, as Amani practiced defensive maneuvers, he stepped into the ring. The air between them crackled. He moved with the grace of a predator, forcing her to anticipate his strikes. When he finally pinned her wrists against the mat, his face was inches from hers. Amani didn't blink. The fear that had once defined her was being replaced by something sharper. "Why go to this length?" she panted, her heart racing not from fear, but from the proximity of the man who was rebuilding her. "You could have hired a dozen professional guards." "Guards can be bought," Jun-Ho whispered, his grip tightening slightly, not to hurt, but to ground her. "Loyalty born of shared pain cannot. They see a girl from the streets. I want them to see a woman who knows their secrets before they even speak them." By the end of the fortnight, Amani looked the same in the mirror, but her posture had changed. She no longer walked with the bowed head of a janitor. She moved with the calculated stillness of someone who knew exactly where the shadows were. She was teaching Haneul how to speak, but Jun-Ho was teaching Amani how to fight. As the media began to sniff around the edges of the Kang estate, whispering about the mystery woman in the billionaire's house, Amani realized the training was just in time. The tutor was ready, and the first lesson was about to begin. The training session had ended hours ago, but the adrenaline still hummed beneath Amani's skin. The mansion was silent, save for the low thrum of the midnight rain against the reinforced glass. Restless, Amani made her way toward the kitchen for a glass of water, but a flick of light from the private study caught her eye. The door was slightly ajar, a rare lapse in security for a man like Jun-Ho Kang. Instead of the cold, untouchable titan she saw in the boardroom, she found a man slumped over a mahogany desk, surrounded by the ghosts of his past. The sharp blazer was gone, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal the ink of a sprawling dragon tattoo that seemed to writhe in the dim lamplight. In his hand wasn't a glass of expensive scotch, but a tattered, hand-drawn birthday card, its edges softened by years of touch. Amani stepped into the room, her presence silent. Jun-Ho didn't reach for the handgun she knew lived in the top drawer. He didn't even look up. "She drew this the day before the accident," he said, his voice a ghost of its usual command. "Before the silence took her. I have all the money in the world, Amani, but I couldn't buy back the sound of my daughter's laughter." Amani walked closer, standing beside the man the world feared as a monster. In the soft light, she saw the dark circles under his eyes and the way his hands trembled ever so slightly. He wasn't just a mafia boss, he was a grieving father drowning in a sea of responsibility. "You blame yourself," Amani whispered, her heart aching with a sudden, sharp empathy. "You think if you were just a businessman instead of a king, she wouldn't have been a target." Jun-Ho finally looked up. The obsidian hardness of his eyes had cracked, revealing a raw, jagged vulnerability. "I built this empire to protect her, but the walls I built only turned into a cage." He stood up, the height difference between them normally intimidating, but now it felt like a bridge. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of Amani's jaw with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. "Then you arrived. A girl who was supposed to be a shadow, yet you're the only thing in this house that isn't cold." The air between them changed, shifting from the tension of a mentor and student to the magnetic pull of two lonely souls. For a second, the billionaire and the orphan were just two people standing in the wreckage of their lives. Amani realized then that his dragon's mercy wasn't a calculation, it was a plea. He didn't just need her for Haneul, he needed her to remind him how to be human. As the rain intensified outside, the mafia boss leaned his forehead against hers, and Amani knew that the contract she had signed was no longer just about survival. It was about a heart she never intended to touch. The fragile piece of the mansion was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon that smelled of jasmine and impending rain. Madam Park, her expression more granite-like than usual, had invited Amani to a formal tea in the sunroom, claiming it was a gesture of reconciliation mandated by the council. Amani knew better than to trust a snake offering a flower, but with Jun-Ho away at a late-night summit, she couldn't refuse without appearing fearful. The sunroom was a masterpiece of architecture, but today it felt like a cage. Haneul sat beside Amani, happily coloring a picture of a dragon and a girl, while Madame Park poured the tea with practiced, trembling precision. The tea was a rare blend, golden and fragrant, served in delicate porcelain that looked thin enough to snap. "In our culture, tea is a sign of respect," Madame Park said, her voice a sharp contrast to the gentle steam rising from the cups. "It is meant to harmonize the spirit. Drink, Miss Vance, you look weary." Amani raised the cup to her lips, but as the liquid neared her mouth, her Tudor protocol training screamed in her mind. She noticed the slight discoloration of the porcelain rim, a faint, oily residue that hadn't been there on Haneul's cup. More importantly, she noticed Madame Park's eyes. They weren't watching Amani's face, they were fixed on her throat, waiting for the swallow. At that moment, Haneul reached for Amani's cup, her small hand darting out. "Can I try, Unnai?" Amani's heart stopped. She didn't just move. She reacted with the predatory speed Jun-Ho had beaten into her during their sparring sessions. She swiped the cup away just as Haneul's fingers brushed it, sending the porcelain crashing to the marble floor. The tea splashed against the white stone, and within seconds, a faint, acrid hiss rose from the liquid as it began to discolor the expensive finish. Haneul jumped back, startled, but Amani was already on her feet, her hand gripping Madame Park's wrist with a strength that made the older woman gasp. "The reconciliation is over," Amani hissed, her voice a low, dangerous vibration that mirrored Jun-Ho's. "You didn't just try to kill me, you almost killed the princess." Madame Park's face went ghostly pale, the mask of the perfect servant finally crumbling. "The council! They said it would be painless. They said you were a parasite." "I'm the woman who saved her voice," Amani countered, her eyes flashing with a cold, mahogany fire. "And if you ever touch a teapot in this house again, I won't need Jun-Ho to deal with you. I'll do it myself." Amani gathered a confused Haneul into her arms and walked out, leaving the shattered porcelain and the poisoned tea behind. The war was no longer in the shadows. The council had drawn blood, and Amani knew that from this moment on, she wasn't just a guest. She was a survivor in a house of wolves. The transformation was complete, but the reflection in the gilded mirror of the master suite felt like a stranger. Amani wore a gown of deep emerald silk that draped over her curves like liquid jewel, the color a defiant contrast against her rich mahogany skin. Around her neck sat a collar of diamonds that felt less like jewelry and more like a mark of Jun-Ho's protection. Tonight was the Emerald Gala, the most prestigious event in Seoul's high society, and Jun-Ho wasn't just introducing her as a tutor. He was unveiling her as his partner. "You look like a queen preparing for war," Jun-Ho's voice came from the doorway. He was dressed in a charcoal tuxedo, his presence commanding and lethal. He walked toward her, his eyes tracing the line of her throat. "The people in that room will try to look through you. They will try to make you feel small. Do not let them." Amani took a breath, the weight of the diamond's coldness grounding her. "I've spent my life being invisible, Jun-Ho. Tonight, I think I'd rather be the ghost that haunts them." As they entered the grand ballroom of the Shilla Hotel, the sea of conversation died an abrupt death. Hundreds of eyes, the elite, the corrupt, and the judgmental, turned toward them. The air grew thick with a collective, sharp intake of breath. Amani felt the sting of their whispers, the silent questions about her race, her background, and her right to stand beside the dragon of the Kang Empire. The council of elders sat at a raised table, their faces stony. Beside them was Director Min, Jun-Ho's most ambitious rival, who watched Amani with a predatory glint in his eyes. Jun-Ho didn't lead her to a corner to hide. Instead, he led her straight to the center of the dance floor. The orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz. As Jun-Ho placed his hand on the small of her back, Amani caught sight of the socialite's sneers. But then, she saw Haneul standing near the edge of the floor, wearing a matching emerald ribbon in her hair. The little girl waved, her lips forming the silent word, "Unnai." The fear evaporated. Amani leaned into Jun-Ho, her movements fluid and rhythmic, a dance of defiance. She wasn't just a guest or a janitor. She was the woman who had survived their poison and tamed their king. As they spun, the whispers changed from mockery to a fearful curiosity. Amani realized that the Gala of Ghosts wasn't about the people in the room, it was about laying her own ghosts to rest. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She was the light that was blinding them. But as Director Min leaned over to whisper to one of the elders, Amani knew the real battle hadn't even begun. The debut was over. The target was now firmly on her back. The morning after the gala, the air in the Kang Tower was thick with a silence that felt like a held breath. Amani stood in the center of Jun-Ho's high-tech office, watching the city below. She was no longer the girl in the supply closet, but the diamonds at her throat felt heavier than ever. Jun-Ho was in an emergency meeting with the board, leaving Amani to oversee Haneul's lessons. The betrayal didn't come with a scream. It came with a soft chime from the tablet Jun-Ho had given her. Amani's tutor protocol training kicked in as she swiped through a series of intercepted messages. Her blood turned to ice. The Council of Elders hadn't just been planning to remove her. They had orchestrated a coup to strip Jun-Ho of his chairmanship, using Amani as the moral stain to justify his ousting. Suddenly, the heavy mahogany doors burst open. It wasn't Jun-Ho. It was Director Min, flanked by 4 men in tactical gear, not the Kang family guards, but private mercenaries. The chairman is currently being detained by the board for questioning regarding his ties to undocumented foreign nationals, Min said, a serpent's smile stretching across his face. He looked at Haneul, who had frozen with a crayon midair. And as for the princess, the council has decided she requires more, traditional guardianship. Amani stepped in front of Haneul, her posture shifting into the defensive stance Jun-Ho had taught her. You're not taking her. You're a janitor playing at being a queen, Miss Vance, Min sneered, signaling his men to move forward. Did you really think a few weeks of training could erase a lifetime of being nothing? The first mercenary lunged. Amani didn't panic. She remembered the blind spots Jun-Ho had shown her. She used the heavy tablet as a blunt instrument, catching the man in the temple before spinning and using his own momentum to send him crashing into the glass desk. But as the other 3 closed in, the lights in the tower flickered and died. The emergency lockdown, Amani whispered to herself. She realized Min hadn't just come for Haneul. He had sabotaged the building's security to trap them. Through the dark, she saw the red glow of the elevators being bypassed. The council wasn't just striking at Jun-Ho's career, they were erasing his legacy. Unai, I'm scared, Haneul whispered, her voice cracking the silence. Amani grabbed the girl's hand, her mind racing. The main exits were blocked, and Jun-Ho was trapped floors below. She looked at the vents she used to clean, the small, dark spaces where she used to hide. The council thought she was a stain, but they forgot that a stain knows how to seep into the cracks. Don't be scared, little princess, Amani hissed, her eyes gleaming with a lethal mahogany fire. They think this is their tower. They forgot that I'm the one who knows where all the ghosts live. As the mercenaries' flashlights cut through the dark, Amani and Haneul vanished into the ventilation shafts, leaving Director Min screaming into the void of the darkened office. The hunt had begun, but the prey had just changed the rules of the game. The ventilation shafts were a labyrinth of cold steel and whistling wind, but to Amani, they were a map of her survival. While Director Min's mercenaries tore through the executive suites with heavy boots and frantic shouts, Amani moved with the silent grace of a shadow. Haneul clung to her back, her small arms wrapped tightly around Amani's neck, her breath hitching but her voice remaining silent. Amani knew every turn, every rusted grate, and every narrow bypass. She had spent months as a nobody, scouring these very veins of the building. Below them, the tower was a war zone. Emergency red lights pulsed like a dying heart, casting long, jagged shadows across the marble halls. Amani reached the central junction overlooking the private elevator lobby and peered through the slats. Her heart nearly stopped. Jun-Ho was there, surrounded. He had fought like a demon. His knuckles were bruised and his charcoal suit was torn, but the council's betrayal was absolute. 6 men held him at gunpoint, while the eldest stood before him, a tablet in hand containing the forced resignation papers. Sign them, Jun-Ho, the elder hissed, before we find the girl and the orphan, and ensure they never see the sun again. Amani didn't wait for a plan. She relied on the tutor protocol instinct Jun-Ho had instilled in her. She whispered a final instruction to Haneul to stay hidden, then kicked the grate open. She didn't just fall, she descended like an avenging spirit. She landed on the shoulders of the nearest guard, using her momentum to drive his head into the stone floor. Before the others could react, she snatched his dropped sidearm and fired 3 precision shots into the ceiling's fire suppression pipes. A torrent of pressurized water and chemical foam exploded into the room, creating a blinding white fog. In the chaos, Amani was a ghost. She moved through the mist, disarming the disoriented men with the brutal efficiency she had practiced in the mansion's ring. She wasn't a janitor, and she wasn't just a guest. She was the shield. She reached Jun-Ho's side just as he wrested a weapon from another guard. For a heartbeat, they stood back to back in the freezing rain of the lobby, the billionaire and the orphan, a unified front against a crumbling empire. "You came back," Jun-Ho panted, his eyes burning with a mixture of terror and fierce pride. "I told you," Amani replied, her voice steady as she leveled the weapon at the approaching Director Min. "Some roots go deeper than you can imagine. Now let's go get our daughter." The rescue wasn't just about escaping the tower. It was the moment the power shifted. As they fought their way to the extraction point, Amani realized she was no longer being protected. She was the one holding the line, proving that the Council's greatest mistake was assuming that her past made her weak, when it was exactly what made her invincible. The scars of the coup were still fresh on the skyline of Seoul, but inside the grand ancestral hall of the Kang estate, the air smelled of white lilies and expensive incense. This was not the quiet, hidden ceremony the Council of Elders had demanded. This was a coronation. After the night at the tower, Jun-Ho hadn't just dismantled the council. He had erased them, replacing the old guard with a new order that recognized merit over bloodlines and loyalty over tradition. Amani stood before the high altar, her reflection a breathtaking fusion of 2 worlds. She wore a traditional Korean wedding hanbok, but the silk was a deep, regal mahogany that matched her skin, embroidered with gold African violets, a tribute to her roots. Beside her, Haneul stood as the flower girl, her voice now a constant, joyful melody as she chatted with the guests. The silent princess was silent no more, and the girl from the supply closet was no longer hiding. Jun-Ho took Amani's hands, his gaze so intense it felt like a vow before he even spoke. He had discarded the cold mask of the mafia boss. In its place was a man who had found his soul in the most unlikely of places. "They told me you were a guest in my house," he whispered, loud enough for the gathered elite to hear. "But they were wrong. You are the foundation. You didn't just save my daughter, you saved me from the monster I was becoming." As they exchanged rings, bands of rare gold encrusted with black diamonds, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The socialites who had once sneered now bowed their heads in genuine respect. They weren't just witnessing a marriage, they were witnessing the birth of a new dynasty. Amani looked out at the crowd, her heart swelling with a peace she had never known. She was no longer an orphan drifting through the shadows of a foreign city. She was a mother, a wife, and the most powerful woman in the Kang Empire. The ceremony concluded not with a traditional bow, but with Jun-Ho pulling Amani into a fierce, protective kiss that shattered the last of the old traditions. As they walked down the aisle, Haneul clutching both their hands, Amani realized that her journey hadn't been about finding a billionaire or escaping a predator. It had been about finding the voice she didn't know she had. The girl who spoke Korean to a stranger in the dark had sparked a fire that burned down a corrupt kingdom and built a sanctuary in its place. The world had expected a scandal, but what they got was a legend. As the heavy doors of the hall opened to a sea of camera flashes and cheering crowds, Amani Vance stepped into the light, finally home. The shadows were gone, and the new dynasty had just begun.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and lets you know when new videos drop. Lastly, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video.